What's up, ladies, gents, and germs? I'm Jack, and welcome back to CT the Head, the audio journal of my journey through pre-med, the MCAT, and beyond. In this second episode, I'll take you through my experience as a patient infected with Staphylococcus aureus, a bacterium that lives in your skin and can cause infectious disease, which continues to plague emergency rooms across the country as MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. It's scary to have personally been infected with this bug that is becoming increasingly resistant to humankind's first line and go-to defense, antibiotics. Here we go. If you didn't listen to the intro episode, I had an infection in my brain when I was 7 months old that nearly killed me. I had another infection caused by the same organism in my leg 10 years later. These two events, one I have absolutely no memory of, and the other I do remember, were the most significant personal medical events in my life so far. Other than these, I'm usually really healthy. So when I get sick, I get sick. I've always been curious, even when I wasn't planning on going into medicine, of how these infections occurred, where they were, and what was done to treat me. It wasn't until February 2018 that I obtained medical records from Children's Hospital in Seattle that I managed to get many of these questions answered. As a pre-med, I just wanted to know more about the event that nearly snuffed me out for good. So I didn't know you could obtain medical records about yourself. I don't know, somehow that thought didn't occur to me. And to be honest, I can't remember if somebody suggested this to me or how exactly I arrived at requesting my own records, but I did. If you don't know, most, if not all, hospitals have to keep patients' records for some period of time, depending on the state of which they operate in. According to the Office of the National Coordinator of Health Information Technology, the state of Washington must keep records 10 years after the patient's most recent discharge. I'm not sure why they still had my records from 1993. A woman from Children's Records Department explained to me they just store all their records. To request the records, I went to Children's website where you can request records through an authorization to release, obtain, exchange patient healthcare information. If you're curious about your own care, I would highly recommend researching how you can obtain records through the hospital or clinic of which you received care. I mean, the information I could request was insane. CTs, labs, surgical reports, ER reports, pathology, etc. It was thorough. I ended up pulling records from August 1993 to January 1995, hopefully a wide enough interval to capture my time as a patient. When I got the records, oh my god, were they ever eerie. The first thing I received was a disc from the radiology department with tens of CT images of my head. On most of them, you can clearly see a large mass on the right side of the image. I was actually kind of disappointed because I thought I'd requested more information. But fortunately, a whole packet of more records arrived a few weeks later. I'll take you through this story as presented by the medical records. Disclaimer, all the names of the physicians I've changed. And most importantly, I am a pre-med student. I'm not an MD. A lot of the details I had to look up in order to present a clear picture for you guys. Let's get started. On September 21st, 1993, I was seen by my primary care physician, Dr. North, in Minneapolis for what my mom described as lethargy, irritability, and a fever of 101 to 102 degrees Fahrenheit. According to my mom, Dr. North concluded it wasn't anything serious, but treated me with Augmentin for 7 days. What is Augmentin? Augmentin is the brand name for the antibiotic consisting of both amoxicillin and clavulanate potassium, according to rxlist.com. While on this antibiotic, my condition first improved, but worsened after the 7 days. Despite their apparent illness, my mom and I traveled to see my grandmother on Vashon Island, Washington, the island in the Puget Sound of which we would later move to. According to my mom, she felt confident in Dr. North's conclusion that I had, quote, a cold, and did well with the Augmentin. See, I was adopted from Brazil, and nobody in my family had met me yet, so she really wanted to make the trip, and she'd already purchased the tickets. I suspect the sensation from altitude change in the flight made the pain and pressure inside my skull worse. But that's the thing. We trust doctors, both their credentials and the years of school behind them. Most of us assume and trust they are right and carry on our lives even if, in truth, we shouldn't. So we took the trip, but my condition further declined, and my grandmother insisted we see her physician, Dr. Brooke. Brooke found my white blood cell count to be 18,000 per cubic millimeter. That means if you were to take a cubic millimeter sample of my blood, it would contain about 18,000 white blood cells. White blood cells help us fight infections, and there are several different types. Most of us are familiar with yellowish pus. That's a whole song and dance party of white blood cells in a bar fight with germs. According to Nicklaus Children's Hospital in South Florida and Children's Oncology Group, a normal white blood cell count for an infant is between 5,000 and 10,000. Alarm bells should be ringing for a count of 18,000. On September 25th, 1993, I was promptly taken to Children's Seattle's emergency room. The ER found one of my fontanelles bulging due to whatever was inside my skull. Fontanelles are the soft spots in an infant's skull before the bones fuse together. A head CT revealed a 4x4 by 3 centimeter ring-enhanced lesion on my left parietal lobe. According to Fauci A. Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine, a ring-enhanced lesion is an area of decreased density surrounded by a rim or ring of concentration of the contrast dye used to enhance the CT image. Basically, the image showed something there that wasn't normal brain tissue. And these images are insane. There's a silhouette of my baby head with white rim of my skull and dark gray inside where my brain is. And on the right side of the image is a large black void where something is causing disease. The CT shows a mass on the right side of the image, but the mass is anatomically on the left because head CTs are flipped. Right is left and vice versa. I don't know if this is how CTs are today in 2019, but it seems like that would lead to confusion. Figuratively getting your head mixed up. But anyway, I was admitted to the hospital and another white blood cell count revealed my count increased to 22,000. Let me explain what a CT is for those who don't know or haven't had the honor of having one. CT stands for computed tomography. According to Computed Tomography of the Brain, Basics by Dr. David C. Preston, MD, the physics of how these machines capture images are as follows. X-rays are applied in a circular motion with detectors on the opposite side of the body. Body tissue slices, typically 1 centimeter, are mathematically reconstructed and displayed on a grayscale matrix. The density of the tissue is in proportion to the attenuation of the X-rays which pass through. Tissues like air and water have little attenuation and displayed as low densities, dark, whereas bone has high attenuation and is displayed as high density, bright, on CT. Among pathologic conditions, high-density lesions are often seen with freshly clotted blood, hyperemia, and with the use of contrast. Low-density lesions include edema and necrosis. Okay, the SAT word here is attenuation. Attention. What is attenuation? According to Christopher Muscato of the University of Northern Colorado, attenuation is the dampening of sound. A sound wave's energy changes given the obstacles encountered or materials passed through. In the case of a CT, X-rays behave the same way given different tissues they encounter. So, like the physics described, waves pass through bone differently than fluid. X-rays will thus pass differently through an infected mass than healthy tissue. That's how the radiologist determined I had a left parietal brain abscess. According to Blakemore and Frith's 2005 publication, The Learning Brain, the parietal lobe is responsible for integrating sensory information and numerical relationships. Regina Bailey, a science writer in an article of ThoughtCo, lists the parietal lobe's other functions to include mathematical reasoning, reading, and writing. Maybe that's why it took me forever to get math. No, there's no way to prove that. The mass required surgery. I was taken to the OR where neurosurgeons Drs. Lester and Graham bore a hole at the infection site and drained 35 cc's, or 35 mL, of yellow-green pus-like fluid from the abscess. 35 mL is a little more than an eighth of a cup. Considering how small a baby's head is, that's a lot of fluid. After the operation, I was treated with 3 different antibiotics, and I apologize if I don't pronounce these correctly: vancomycin, ceftriaxone, and Flagyl. The drained pus was sent to the lab for analysis, where they revealed Staphylococcus aureus bacteria. Staphylococcus aureus, or Staph A for short, is a gram-positive bacteria that already lives in our skin and typically doesn't cause us harm. However, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, staph can cause serious infections or death. Well, what the hell is gram-positive? Okay, bacteria are single-celled organisms. Cells have a membrane that encloses their contents like cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is water and dissolved chemicals. In addition to this membrane, gram-positive bacteria can also have a cell wall covering the membrane composed of a polymer called peptidoglycan. There are also gram-negative bacteria, which essentially have more armor because they have an inner membrane, a layer of peptidoglycan, and an outer membrane. More armor on these negative Nancys means they are more difficult to treat with antibiotics than gram-positive. The word gram in this context refers to the scientist Hans Christian Gram, who developed the gram stain technique used to determine the membrane composition of bacteria. Staph A are round or spherical bacteria that clump together in clusters. Many of them wear exclusively Supreme brand clothing, drink wine from coffee mugs, and are often heard through a stethoscope blasting music from their cars for the whole neighborhood to hear. Okay, a Google image search of Staph A shows the clusters of bacteria look more like bright purple grapes under a black light. So why did this happen? The short answer is nobody knows, or probably will ever know. It was also 27 years ago, and there's no point in investigating since I'm alive, and as far as I can tell, my brain didn't suffer any permanent damage. I actually reconnected with Dr. Lester last February, who explained to me that a series of ear infections I had could have indicated the later serious infection. I don't know if that necessarily means repeated ear infections lead to more serious infections. And that's it. I was healthy for the next 10 years until this happened again in my leg. If you didn't hear the intro episode, in 2005, when I was 11 years old, I was helping a friend move gallon cartons of water, and when I lifted one, I felt a shooting pain through my leg. When I looked at my leg, nothing looked abnormal, so I didn't think much about it. However, the pain worsened. And oh boy, am I glad I don't remember my head infection, because the leg pain was by far the worst pain I've ever felt. When I turned my foot or knee a certain way, it literally felt like somebody plunged a knife right into my thigh to the bone. It was unbearable. The other symptoms were similar to those present during my brain infection: fever, no appetite, lethargic, and, you guessed it, I was irritable. Sometime in late February or early March 2005, I was admitted to Swedish Hospital this time, which is also in Seattle. At this point, we had moved to Vashon. The first day, I'd only ate breakfast at home, so when I arrived at the hospital, they didn't want me to eat in case they had to operate on my leg, which they didn't need to that day, so I didn't eat until maybe 9 p.m. that night. I was really sad, not just about being in the hospital, but because I was missing my school band's Pops concert. I used to play trombone, and our band performed 3 concerts a year. The Pops concert was the second concert of the year, where band members dressed in silly costumes and performed music from movies, arrangements from classic rock like Wipeout, Wipeout, like da na 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 na. And I missed this because staff had an agenda. It's okay. I have massive anxiety about performing musical instruments in front of people. Also, my singing has a tendency to cause ear infections, bleeding, aneurysm, stroke, and sudden death. Over the next week and a half, I was seen by a bunch of specialists. From infectious disease was Dr. Clover, orthopedic surgery, Dr. Bale, and a muscle specialist with a super long last name that I don't remember or could hope to pronounce if I did. They thought at first the source of the pain was my bones, but a CAT scan revealed another mass in my leg, an abscess of Staph A. For those who haven't had a CAT scan, the contrast liquid, which I think what I had was barium sulfate, tastes like a banana-flavored naked juice mixed with rust. I think the flavor makes it so much worse. It's like eating a metallic banana. I had an operation to drain the abscess and insert a port into my right arm for antibiotics. So what caused this infection? Again, the short answer is nobody knows, and there's no point in investigating. I suspect what happened is I used to have to take these shots when I was a kid, and I would of course swab the area on my thigh with alcohol before sticking myself, but I hate needles, and I think one time I waited too long before injecting myself, and maybe staff rode the needle into my leg muscle and found the property taxes there to be an incentive to stay and grow. But seriously, this is speculation. I reflect on these experiences often, and certainly more so since becoming a pre-med and starting this podcast. I feel fairly removed from the near-death experience of a brain infection since I have no memory of it. However, as a parent, I can empathize with my mom on how terrified she must have been for my life. In fact, she started to read the medical records, but couldn't finish the first page. Reading them gave me chills, too. It's not another patient. It was me. One thing I've learned about medicine is it's key to keep in mind provider-patient perspective. It's one thing to care for or treat somebody as a provider when you yourself don't have the dimension of pain and fear, but when it is you or a loved one, that's when you feel the heaviness of anxiety all over your body and despair for your well-being. Another element was the hospital stay itself. It felt like forever. For me, it was all about getting out and going home. I felt like a prisoner, even though I knew very well I couldn't leave because the doctors, nurses, and other staff were helping me heal. Fun fact, on March 8th, 2005, Mount St. Helens, located near Seattle, started smoking. And I don't mean it got stressed out and started smoking cigarettes. I mean smoke started billowing out from inside the massive caldera. This thing erupted back in 1980. But I could see this from my hospital room window. And in my 11-year-old head, I thought one of my worst fears of moving to the Pacific Northwest was about to unfold, that I'd be in proximity to a volcanic eruption. In Minnesota, all we have are tornadoes, and personally, I would rather be swept off to the land of Oz than become a Pompeii statue. But, pick your poison. And speaking of poison, Staph A has become increasingly resistant to antibiotics. Some of you might have heard of MRSA, or MRSA, which stands for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. These guys really like their Supreme brand merch and proliferate in healthcare settings such as ambulances, emergency rooms, if not properly cleaned and sterilized. According to the CDC, MRSA can spread in hospitals and nursing homes, causing sepsis, pneumonia, and a host of other symptoms. CDC notes the disease can spread, quote, by direct contact with an infected wound or from contaminated hands, usually those of a healthcare provider. Also, people who carry MRSA but do not have signs of an infection can spread the bacteria to others. Staph hasn't gone anywhere for anybody, and it's increasingly resisting conventional means of treatment using antibiotics. How do antibiotics actually work, though? According to eBug, an educational service operated by Public Health England, antibiotics are either bacteriostatic or bactericidal. Bacteriostatic drugs interfere with the bacteria's ability to reproduce by attacking the biological mechanism the cell needs to reproduce, like the process of DNA replication. Bactericidal drugs prevent the bacteria from forming a cell wall that holds in all its contents like DNA and cytoplasm. Bacteria become resistant through evolution's mechanism of natural selection. In a population of bacteria introduced to antibiotics, some bacteria will have a genetic mutation that makes them immune to that antibiotic. The other bacteria will die, but the resistant bug has a relative advantage that allows it to better survive and reproduce more resistant bacteria. This mechanism repeats itself over and over with higher concentrations of antibiotics. Go to YouTube and search for the evolution of bacteria on a megaplate petri dish from the Kishoni lab and uploaded by Harvard Medical School. The video is 1, insanely cool, 2, terrifying. The video shows a large table-sized and shaped petri dish, which they marked into sections of increasingly higher concentrations of antibiotics from the outside in, i.e. a gradient of increasing antibiotic concentration from the ends of this surface toward the middle. Bacteria were placed at the ends of the surface, and over time, the population was able to adapt through natural selection to proliferate towards the area of high antibiotic concentration. In one of my biology labs, we performed an experiment where we altered the genes of E. coli bacteria to make them resistant to the antibiotic ampicillin. Bacteria's genetic information is contained in circular DNA called a plasmid. We mixed a solution of E. coli with pre-made solution containing both the genetic information that would code for a protein to make the E. coli resistant to ampicillin and an enzyme to cut the bacteria's original plasmid DNA. We placed the solution in hot water for a few minutes to open the pores in the cell wall so the DNA and enzymes could enter the bacteria's cellular body and, quote, cut and paste the new genetic information. Then we placed the solution in cold water to close the pores. In testing ampicillin on the resistant bacteria and the control group of unaltered E. coli, we successfully committed biological treason by helping the enemy become resistant. We disgraced humankind. Not quite. But we demonstrated in a lab setting we could manipulate DNA to create more dangerous bacteria. Look, what's happening now with the rise of antibiotic-resistant germs and my personal experience shows we need to take bacterial infections seriously. This isn't an issue of the past. Bacteria have been on Earth much longer than humans. In a way, they have home field advantage. And us humans have to use our big brains if we are to survive this biological arms race. That's it for this one. Thank you so much for listening. In the next episode, we'll explore making connections with physicians and networking.